Minister of Immigration to ban the wearing of face coverings for new Canadians swearing the oath of citizenship. Citizenship and Immigration Minister Jason Kenney says new Canadians will no longer be allowed to wear face coverings such as Niqabs when they are swearing the oath of citizenship. So starting immediately, Muslim women will have to remove any face covering garments such as Niqabs or burqas when it's time to administer the oath. We've seen the ceremonies, like this one here, where new Canadians are encouraged to show up in clothing that reflects their cultural heritage, but from this day on, no face coverings. Why is the government making this move? Let's find out. I spoke with Immigration Minister Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney, first of all, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with CPAC. I appreciate it. Why have you decided that face coverings will no longer be allowed when new Canadians are being sworn in at citizenship ceremonies?
Well, Peter, a few weeks ago, one of my colleagues, Member of Parliament Liberties, was attending a citizenship ceremony in Mississauga where he saw 4 people, presumably women, taking the oath of citizenship with their faces completely covered, I guess with niqabs or burqas. He raised his concern with the citizenship judge, who told him, look, I don't like it, but my hands are tied. This is the rule. We're allowed to have these people take the oath with their faces covered. I became aware of this. I was quite frankly shocked that we were allowing this to occur. I consulted our citizenship judges from across the country last month at their annual conference, and they shared my concern, and many of them, particularly from the Greater Toronto and Montreal regions, reported that this is happening with some increasing frequency, that about every week in those cities where they see candidates with their faces covered. So I immediately instructed my officials to bring forward a regulation clarifying that in taking this public oath, of citizenship oath, a public testimony in a public ceremony, you cannot be hidden behind a face covering. I think it's eminently common sense, and the real question is why we will allow this to happen in the first place.
Let me drill down a bit. So what is the issue here? How does wearing a face covering compromise the citizenship ceremony and the taking of the oath, which is all part of a legal process to citizenship here? So what is the issue?
2 points. First of all, we obviously need to be able to verify that someone has met the statutory requirement of having stated the oath, and we can't do that while they're behind a face covering. Secondly, there's a broader point here, which is this. This is essentially and symbolically a very public act. We're asking people in front of their fellow citizens to bear testimony to their loyalty to Canada and its laws. There couldn't be anything more public. It's a public commitment, and essentially it's in a public space, in a public ceremony, and to have people do it hidden undermines the entire nature of the ceremony. This is about social cohesion. It's about reinforcing our democratic values. And let me be clear about one thing. This is not about freedom of religion. As one of our citizenship judges, who originally comes from the Middle East, pointed out to me, women who go on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, are not allowed to veil or cover their faces. They're required to show their faces. This is not a religious, but rather a tribal custom coming from certain societies where, let's face it, women are treated more like property than human beings. I don't think we want to be giving the imprimatur of Canada to that custom at the high moment of people becoming a citizen.
Okay, we're going to hear from a representative from a woman from the Muslim community who's not happy about what you've done today. And you raised the issue of religion versus culture, and what many in the Muslim community are saying today is, look, if this is a deeply held belief in religion, so in other words, if the woman believes this is part of her religion, and to put it bluntly, how is it up to the Minister of Immigration to say no, it's not?
Well, it's not up to me to decide what the rules are for Muslim women going on the pilgrimage to Hajj, where they are required to show their face. So the notion that there's a religious obligation to go around with your face covered all the time is contradicted by the highest authorities of their own faith. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is that in Canada, in this public undertaking that people make in front of their fellow citizens, I think it is entirely reasonable that we ask that people not hide who they are, and that they do it in a way that we can verify that they're meeting the statutory requirement of stating the oath. And I think that I'll tell you this, Peter, I believe that the vast majority of Muslims in Canada will likely support this measure. Certainly the ones who have contacted me so far today do. They believe that we must reinforce this sense of social cohesion, of openness, the democratic and public nature of the citizenship process and oath, and shouldn't allow people to be hiding, privatizing this very public moment.
Right. Well, some in the Muslim community don't agree with that, and we're going to hear from we'll hear from one of them. So I get both sides of the discussion here, which we always try to do. The woman we're going to hear from is going to tell us that Muslim women feel targeted by this. They feel isolated by this, and she's wondering what about alternatives? Why not microphones next to them during the process, where you can actually hear what they're saying, or a witness within the proceedings standing next to them to confirm that they actually did repeat the oath?
You know, I just frankly think that these ideas are somewhat ridiculous. I think that my officials had suggested to me that we might have a separate swearing in off in a different room in front of a female public servant. Look, we're not going to get into two-tier citizenship ceremonies. I don't want to begin bringing kind of segregation based on gender or culture into our citizenship ceremonies. This is a moment of unity, of new Canadians. It is a public ceremony. No one is required to do it. People choose to become citizens. They're not obliged to become citizens. And we're simply saying, if you're proud to be a Canadian and you want to publicly witness that pride and that commitment, you do so showing your face to all other Canadians, and there's no shame in that. I think it's a positive message of integration to send. It's a positive message of respect for women. That's one of our Canadian values.
Sure. If the object is to confirm that the oath was actually recited, can you confirm that about everybody in the room now? Are some people mumbling their way through it? Some people moving their lips but not saying the words? I mean, where do you go with this?
Yeah, well, we do have actually very precise operational guidelines for our public servants and for the citizenship judges. And so both the judge and the clerk and additional public servants are observing the crowd of people at the ceremonies. We assign a certain number of staff based on the number of candidates that are being sworn in. So we take every reasonable measure to ensure, and occasionally, if our judge or one of our judges or one of our officials spots someone who appears not to be reciting the oath, they're called aside. They're not given their certificate, and they're not allowed to sign the register as new citizens.
Let's finish on this. The Supreme Court, as you know, it heard arguments last week in a case where a woman wants to wear a niqab while testifying in court against her cousin and an uncle in a sexual abuse case. She says the Charter of Right gives her that right. The accused say, well, hang on a second, that would hamper their right to face their accuser in court. Are you expecting the action you've taken today to be challenged in the courts?
I'm not expecting it to be, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised if that happens. It seems to me there's always a lawyer ready to stand by and manufacture some charter claims. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I think it would be completely wrong-headed. I think this makes eminent sense. I think the vast majority of Canadians, including Muslim Canadians, will support this idea that making a public commitment to Canada, you do so publicly and not in a hidden fashion.
All right, Jason Kenney, appreciate your time this evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, this action by Minister Kenney is being heavily criticized by a national Muslim organization. Julia Williams is a human rights and civil liberties officer with the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations. I spoke with her a little earlier. Julia Williams, first of all, thanks for coming in to speak with me. I appreciate you taking the time today to talk about this important subject. Let's start with your response to what Minister Jason Kenney has ordered here. No face coverings when people are taking the citizenship oath to become new Canadians. What's your reaction?
All right. Well, our organization was floored by the news today. I mean, we had no notion that this was coming down the pipe, so to speak. We're disappointed with the decision. We feel that as long as a woman, Niqab, identifies herself when she arrives at the citizenship ceremony, she should be allowed to proceed with the rest of the ceremony, including taking the oath with her face covered.
The minister seems to be saying this is less an issue of identity and more an issue of certainty. To be able to see someone actually repeat the oath, which is part of the law, to actually have them be seen to be taking the oath of citizenship. What's your response to that?
Right, and you know, that is incredibly important, but I think that in this case there are very simple accommodations that can be made that fall short of asking her to actually put aside a religious practice. You know, a court official could stand next to her while she recites the oath to ensure that she said it, or she could be set up with an FM mic so someone can listen in and say, yes, she did actually, you know, say the words. So these are simple accommodations that can be made that, you know, don't require require the extreme of her setting aside a religious practice.
Now, you call it a religious practice, and the minister today is saying it's a cultural tradition, not so much a religious issue. Who's right here?
Well, I had no idea that the minister was an expert in Islamic theology and history, but it's interesting that the point is that the courts in Canada have already determined that as long as someone has a sincerely held religious belief that has a nexus in religion, then she should be able to adhere to that practice, and that should not be infringed upon unless there is legitimate cause. And as I said here, there's an easy accommodation that can be reached.
So his point as well is that when Muslim women perform the pilgrimage, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, they're in fact required not to cover their faces. He says that's the indication that it's not a fundamental religious requirement, that it's a cultural tradition. Right.
Well, I think that the minister would agree that a citizenship ceremony is not the Hajj. So we're talking about completely different contexts. So while that may be true for women in Saudi Arabia on Hajj, it might not be true for what the individual believes she should be doing in public at a Canadian ceremony.
Okay. So what do you think this does to Muslim women who will be performing this oath? What do you think they will feel in terms of a treatment by this country?
I think they'll continue to feel more and more isolated, and I think a lot of that has been going on with discussions around voting, with Bill 94 in Quebec. We had a call this morning at 9 a.m. from a woman who was supposed to take her citizenship oath tomorrow, and she didn't know what she should do or whether or not she would be welcome. She contacted CIC and said that she didn't want a media presence there because, you know, she had been fine with the media there so long as she had her face covering on, but when she knew that she had to remove it, having the media there, you know, made her quite alarmed. So CIC told her, well, we'll give you a new date. So she's no longer taking her oath tomorrow, and she's devastated.
Okay, but presumably when she does take it, the situation won't have changed. If the minister stands by this ban, she'll eventually have to take an oath of citizenship with no face covering.
Exactly, and I mean, she'll have to make that decision, and our organization's job is to find out what the legal repercussions are if she refuses to do so. It would obviously have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I mean, she indicated that she would be willing to follow the regulation, but it's not something she wants to do. It's something that she feels compelled to do.
So are you contemplating court action?
Again, we were totally floored by the announcement today. We haven't spoken yet to lawyers to determine what the status of this regulation is, whether it's a law or, you know, we still need to figure out what sort of course of action can be taken. Had
you heard, the minister had said that he'd been talked to by members of parliament and some judges who were concerned that a face covering prevented them from actually, when they've witnessed these ceremonies, from actually seeing a woman wearing a face covering actually deliver the oath. Had you heard about any concerns around this? Or
I hadn't, and actually it's interesting, you know, at the citizenship ceremony everyone gives the oath together, and there's sort of a presumption of sincerity there. We don't hook people up to a lie detector test to determine whether or not they mean what they're saying, and we just kind of want that extended to the Muslim woman as well. And if there is a real concern out there that, listen, we can't see her mouth, we want to know she actually is uttering the words, there are simple accommodations that can be made to facilitate that.
Okay, Julia Williams, appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.